They say a man's destiny is written not in the stars, but in the ashes he must rise from. And if that is true, then Kael's story was written in fire. They say forgiveness is for the weak, for those who cannot strike back. But they are wrong. Forgiveness is not surrender. It is strength restrained, the quiet victory over the loudest pain. This is the story of General Kael of Damaris, the lion who conquered empires, and in the end conquered himself. Before he was a general, Kael was a man, a husband, a father, a son of simple soil. He had no throne, no army, no taste for war. Only a family that laughed beneath the olive trees and sang at dusk when the wind cooled the fields. But peace is a fragile thing, and men like Commander Varro were born to break what others build. One night, Kael's village burned. Before the flames, before the war, before his name became a legend whispered by soldiers and poets alike. He was simply Kael of Damaris, a man of soil and sunlight. His hands knew the weight of harvest, not the heft of steel. His mornings began with birdsong and ended with his son asleep on his chest, his wife humming softly by the window as the wind carried the scent of olive trees across their small home. He was not a general then. He was not the lion. He was a man content with the small miracles of peace, the laughter of his child, the quiet pride of a day's work done well, the gentle hum of life untouched by war. Damaris itself was a jewel among the borderlands, a valley cupped between gentle hills, its rivers running silver through fields of green. The people were farmers, masons, shepherds, simple souls with strong backs and steady hearts. They sang in the evenings when the sky blushed with sunset, and the children ran barefoot through the orchards, where olive trees grew older than kings. But peace, as Kael would one day learn, is the most fragile of all kingdoms, and men like Commander Varro were born to break what others build. Varro was a name that carried both power and poison, a man forged in conquest. His banners of black and gold bled fear wherever they passed. He believed mercy was weakness, and that order could only grow from the roots of fear. For months, his armies had been sweeping across the southern plains, claiming land, burning resistance, swallowing peace like wildfire. Rumors came to Damaris of towns turned to ash, of men crucified by the roadsides as warnings, of women dragged from their homes under the cries of the dying. But Damaris was far quiet, hidden, unimportant. And so the people whispered prayers instead of preparing defenses. Kael himself had been away, a border scout in the service of the king, posted to the outer ridges to monitor the movements of foreign troops. He thought the war would never touch his home. He thought peace would wait for his return. But on one moonless night, as he stood beneath the cold stars, a distant red glow began to rise on the horizon. At first he thought it was dawn coming too early. Then came the smoke, and then the screams carried by the wind. He ran until his lungs burned, until his armor cut into his shoulders, until his legs felt carved from stone. The night tore open before him with fire and fury. By the time he reached Damaris, it was no longer a village. It was a pyre. Flames climbed the roofs like serpents, curling around beams until they split and fell. Corpses lay where laughter once had been. The olive trees, those ancient witnesses, burned with a kind of cruel majesty, their branches reaching skyward as if begging for rain that would never come. Kael called out for his wife, for his son. No answer, only the crackle of fire and the moan of collapsing homes. He tore through the ruins. His hands blistered, his throat raw with smoke and grief. Then he saw it, a small glimmer beneath a mound of soot and ash. He dug with his bare hands until blood mixed with the dirt. It was her pendant, a simple silver circle she had worn since the day they met. Inside, it was a tiny engraving of the sun. He held it to his chest as the world fell apart around him. Kael did not weep. He could not. Grief, when it grows too heavy, becomes silence. He sat in that silence until dawn bled across the ruins. When the sun rose, the smoke drifted north, toward the mountains where Varro's army had camped. Kael buried what was left of his family beneath the olive tree that still stood. He knelt, pressing his forehead to the earth. "You took everything," he whispered. "I will take everything from you." From that vow, a new man was born. Kael left Damaris that morning not as a farmer, but as something far more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose. He joined the king's army. At first, they saw only a quiet soldier with haunted eyes. But soon, they learned that grief had made him relentless. He trained until his muscles ached, fought until his knuckles split, studied maps and battle formations until the stars themselves blurred. War became his second language, vengeance his heartbeat. The sword he carried became an extension of his will, and every swing felt like a whisper to the dead. Years passed, campaign after campaign. Kael climbed through the ranks, not because he sought power, but because power was the only road that led closer to Varro. His men began to follow him not out of duty, but out of awe. They said he could smell an ambush before it came, that he could fight 3 men at once and still have the breath to curse the fourth. In battle, his eyes burned with a light that frightened even his allies. They began to call him the Lion of Damaris, a title he neither sought nor cherished, but it clung to him like a shadow. Under his command, the king's forces reclaimed border after border. Villages once lost were freed, fortresses taken by siege or storm. Kael never celebrated. Every victory was just another stone laid on the road toward vengeance. At night, when the camps grew quiet and the stars returned, he would sit alone, polishing the pendant that had survived the fire. He would whisper to it as though it could hear him. "Soon," he'd say, "soon, my love, I'll find him." But vengeance is a cruel master. It feeds on patience and offers no peace in return. Each life he took only deepened the hollow inside him. He became what war needed, a weapon that did not question, did not rest. Yet beneath that armor of fury, a man still lived, a man who once laughed under olive trees, who still saw his son's face in the faces of orphaned children begging for bread in burned-out towns. One night after a brutal siege, a wounded soldier stumbled into Kael's tent. The man's face was half-burned, his eyes wild with guilt and pain. "My lord," he gasped. They said to burn it all. Commander Varro's order, the villages, the farms, all of them. He rides north now. They say he takes trophies. Kael froze. The name struck him like a blade drawn too close to the bone. Varro still alive, still burning. He dismissed his men and sat alone, staring at the map spread before him. 10 years of war, and the path still led to one name. He traced his finger across the mountains, across the valleys blackened with ink that marked battles fought and lives lost. 10 years, he whispered. 10 years of blood, and still you breathe. Outside, thunder rolled like drums of the gods. Kael rose, the light from the torch glinting off his armor. He looked not like a man, but a monument to everything vengeance had cost him. When dawn came, his army moved. The march to the north began. Toward Varro, toward the end of the vow made in ashes. War is a strange kind of mirror. It does not show a man who he is, only what he is willing to become. By the time Kael reached the northern plains, he was no longer merely a soldier. He was legend. He was wrath given flesh. His name preceded him like thunder rolling before a storm. Villages heard whispers before they ever saw his banners. "The Lion of Damaris is coming," they said. "Pray you are not standing in his path." The Northern War was brutal beyond measure. For every town that surrendered, two more resisted. The land itself seemed cursed. Mud that swallowed the feet of horses. Rivers that ran black with soot and the blood of the fallen. Each night, the fires of a dozen skirmishes glowed like stars fallen to earth. Kael rode through it all in silence, his armor dulled by ash, his eyes fixed only on the horizon. He no longer fought for victory. He fought for ghosts. Varro's shadow lingered ahead. Always one campaign away, one fortress beyond reach. Kael's scouts would return with rumors. He was seen near the pass. He commanded the burning of Lathra. He fled east when the siege broke. Always near. Always escaping. Like smoke through fingers. And so Kael pressed on. Each battle turned him further into what he swore to destroy. He began to order raids of his own. Villages that harbored enemy supplies. Towns that resisted conscription. He told himself it was necessity. But deep down, he felt the tremor of something darker. A satisfaction that frightened him. His men followed without question. To them, Kael was justice itself. The embodiment of vengeance. They saw the fury in his eyes and mistook it for divine purpose. But inside, Kael was crumbling. Every fire they lit reminded him of another fire long ago. Every cry of the conquered sounded like his wife's voice fading in smoke. He could no longer tell if he was hunting Varro or becoming him. One night, after a siege that lasted 7 days, Kael walked through the ruins of a city he had just claimed. The air reeked of blood and smoke. Bodies lined the streets, their faces gray in the moonlight. A child, no older than his son had been, stumbled from a doorway, eyes wide with terror. Kael froze. The boy's clothes were torn, his small hands blackened with soot. When he saw Kael's sword, he flinched and tried to run. But Kael knelt and held out his hand. "No harm," he whispered. The words felt strange on his tongue. Soft, unfamiliar. The boy hesitated, then slowly approached. Kael reached into his cloak and pulled out a piece of bread. The boy took it, eyes still wary. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared into the smoke. Kael remained there long after the boy was gone, his hand trembling. He realized that the same fear that had once haunted him now lived in others. Because of him. That night he could not sleep. The faces of the dead rose behind his eyelids. The faces of the living haunted him more. He poured wine into his cup and stared into it, as though it might offer answers. "Is this what you wanted?" he whispered into the darkness. "Is this justice, my love? Or just madness with a crown?" Outside, thunder rumbled again. But this time, it sounded less like war, and more like warning. Seasons passed. The campaigns continued. Kael's army grew vast, a tide of steel and fury that no force could withstand. Kingdoms fell. Borders shifted. And yet, for Kael, it was all smoke. Victories without meaning, trophies without joy. Then one day, a scout brought word. Varro had been sighted again. Not rumor this time, certainty. The old commander had taken refuge in the fortress of Relan, a stone citadel carved into the cliffs overlooking the valley of Damaris. The circle was closing. Kael gathered his captains. "We march at dawn," he said. No rallying cry. No fire. Just the weight of 10 years pressing in his voice. The siege of Relan began under grey skies. For 21 days, the valley echoed with the screams of war. Kael's engines hurled fire upon the walls. Arrows darkened the sun. The rivers ran red again, as they had the night Damaris burned. When at last the fortress fell, Kael's men poured through the gates like floodwater. The banners of black and gold, Varro's banners, were torn down and trampled into the mud. Kael stood amidst the ruin, his armor dented, his face streaked with soot. He had done it. He had reached the end of his road. But even in victory, he felt only exhaustion. He ordered the prisoners brought before him. Officers, soldiers, servants. He scanned their faces, searching for one in particular. And then his captain entered the tent, breathless. "My lord," he said, "we found him. Commander Varro captured alive." The words seemed to still the air itself. Kael's heart pounded once, just once, and then went still. "Where?" he asked. "In the lower camp, bound." He surrendered without a fight. Kael dismissed his guards and walked alone to the prisoner's tent. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if each was dragging a year of war behind it. The camp was silent. Even the wind held its breath. When he entered, he saw Varro kneeling in chains. The man was smaller than memory. His hair grey, his armor gone. He looked up slowly, and when their eyes met, the world seemed to narrow to two souls, and the long shadow that bound them. Varro's lips curled into a bitter smile. "So," he rasped, "the lion finally caught his prey. Come, Kael of Damaris. Finish what began in fire." Kael stared at him, the man who had murdered his family, who had burned his home, who had carved his name into Kael's nightmares. And yet, as he looked at Varro, he saw not a monster, but a mirror. The same hollow eyes, the same weary posture of a man who had seen too much death. "You remember Damaris?" Kael asked quietly. "The families you burned." Varro's gaze flickered. "Every general has his ghosts," he said. "Yours were simply louder than mine." Kael's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword. 10 years of rage coiled inside him like a serpent ready to strike. The tent felt smaller, the air thick with the scent of iron and rain. "You killed my wife," Kael said. "My son, you turned me into this." Varro's voice was low, almost taunting. "I made you a legend. Without me, you'd still be a farmer dreaming of glory. Now finish your story." Kael raised his sword. Every battle, every night of fury and grief, led to this moment. He could almost hear the cries of the dead urging him on. But something buried deep, held his hand. He saw the boy in the burning city again. He saw his wife's face, not in pain, but in the peace of their old life. And he realized, if he struck now, he would not end the cycle. He would complete it. The sword trembled in Kael's hand. Every breath, every heartbeat, every wound he had carried for 10 long years seemed to rise and speak through that blade. Around him, the torches hissed and flickered. Outside the tent, his soldiers waited. An army of men who had learned from his rage, who believed vengeance was the law that kept the world upright. But inside, there was only silence. Kael and Varro, two men, two ghosts, two ends of the same burning road. Kael's arm was raised. His heart thundered like drums of war. One strike and it would all be over. One strike and the past would finally fall quiet. Varro's eyes did not flinch. He knelt straight back despite the chains, his face pale but proud. He wanted death, not because he feared it, but because dying at Kael's hand would make his story complete. He would be remembered as the villain who forged a hero. And in that dark symmetry, he would still have one. Kael saw it. He understood. And that understanding cut deeper than any blade. His hand began to lower. The tip of the sword fell, slowly, until the metal kissed the earth with a hollow ring. The sound was small, but it carried through the camp like thunder. Every man outside heard it, and none dared to move. Kael stepped back. His breath came heavy, uneven. Not from exhaustion, but release. Varro blinked, disbelief clouding his defiance. "You will not kill me," he whispered. Kael shook his head. "No, not today, not ever." Varro's voice cracked, the edge of pride breaking into something smaller, something almost human. "Why, after all I've done, you would let me live?" Kael's answer came soft, but each word struck with the weight of revelation. "Because I finally understand what you never could. You destroyed my home, but I will not let you destroy what is left of me. You took my family. I will not let you take my soul." He turned his back. For a long moment, he simply stood in the doorway of the tent, rain beginning to fall beyond the canvas. Then, to his captain waiting outside, he said the words that would echo for generations. "Let him live. Let him remember." Gasps rippled through the camp. His men, killers hardened by 10 years of blood, looked at one another in confusion. Some muttered that their general had gone soft. Others waited for him to take it back. But Kael did not. He sheathed his sword and walked out into the storm. Each drop of rain that struck him felt like a baptism. Cold, cleansing, real. Behind him, Varro sank to his knees, the chains clinking softly as he bowed his head. No enemy had ever wounded him like that. Kael had given him something far worse than death. Time. Time to think. Time to remember. Time to feel the weight of everything he had done. In the days that followed, Kael's army grew restless. Men whispered around the fires, their voices sharp with doubt. "Mercy for the butcher of Damaris. Has the lion lost his claws? Will the enemy now think us weak?" But Kael ignored them. He rode through the ruined valley and looked upon the land he had spent half his life destroying. Fields lay black and silent, rivers choked with ash. The bones of old homes jutted from the earth like broken teeth. He dismounted, walked among the ruins, and understood at last the full measure of his war. He had won, and yet there was nothing left to rule. So Kael did something no conqueror had ever done. He began to rebuild, brick by brick, field by field. He ordered that no more towns be burned, no more prisoners executed. He gave food to those who had once called him enemy. He reopened the wells, sent healers to the wounded, and built schools for the orphaned children left behind by both armies. At first, his men obeyed out of confusion, then out of loyalty. Then, slowly, out of belief, they began to see that power was not in the taking, but in the restoring, that the greatest strength was not in breaking enemies, but in refusing to let hatred break you. And so peace, that fragile, impossible thing, began to grow again, like a green shoot pushing through blackened soil. Years passed. The world moved on. The fires dimmed. Kael grew older. His hair silvered. His scars deepened. And the great sword that once burned with vengeance gathered dust on the wall. He ruled for a time, not as a conqueror, but as a guardian, a builder of bridges where there had once been walls. The name, the Lion of Damaris, remained, but it meant something different now. Not a beast of war, but a protector of peace. And though he never spoke of Varro again, the memory lingered, not as torment, but as a teacher. Some said Varro fled to the mountains. Others whispered he became a monk, living out his days in silence, praying each dawn for the souls of the fallen. Kael never sought to know the truth. To chase, it would be to reopen wounds he had already healed. One evening, many years after the fires had gone cold, Kael walked alone to the top of a hill above the valley. The olive trees had returned, their leaves shimmering gold in the dying light. He sat beneath one and held a small pendant in his hand, the same one that had survived the night his world burned. The silver had dulled with age, but the engraving of the sun was still clear. He turned it over in his palm and smiled. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "I didn't become him." The wind stirred through the branches, soft as a sigh. Kael closed his eyes. That night the general slept beneath the stars, and did not wake again. They buried him where he fell, on the hill that overlooked Damaris, the land that had known both his rage and his mercy. His tomb was simple, as he had wished. No crown, no sword. Only 6 words carved into the stone. "Here lies Kael, the merciful." Those words outlived every kingdom, every banner, every victory carved in blood. Because the world forgets those who destroy, but it remembers those who forgive when they could destroy. Generations later, mothers in Damaris would tell their children, "When you are wronged, remember the lion. When anger calls for blood, remember his silence. For revenge is easy. Mercy, mercy is mastery." And so Kael's story endured, not as a tale of war, but as a hymn of restraint, a song for all who stand the edge of vengeance and choose to step back. Because anyone can hate, only the strong can forgive.